Welcome to the Link. My name is Lee Woodmansee. I am the campus minister here at the Baptist Collegiate Ministry at the University of Arkansas at Fort Smith. Right now, you're catching us with episode 26 of our podcast. The Link is a podcast that is designed to do three things. We want to get students connected with topics of theology and the practical outworkings of that theology. We want to get students connected with churches and their staff in this area. And we want students to get connected with faculty and staff at the university here at UA Fort Smith. And today, we're going to be continuing on a conversation that I'm having with Cole Penick, who is joining me now to talk about our next topic, which is friendship and accountability. That's what we're going to talk about. Cole, thanks for being here again.
Absolutely.
Rock on. So I'll just say this. If you guys joined us with the last episode, either on YouTube or on Spotify, you can go back and listen to that. You can catch more information about who Cole is. But he is my counterpart up in Fayetteville. He's an elder at his church at University Baptist Church. All sorts of good stuff. Thank you for joining us once again.
And your friend for a long time.
Yeah, we have been friends since 2005. Is that right?
Yeah.
So 15 years. I think we actually said that in the last time that we were in this room hanging out. I'll link that in the video. You'll see the last time we were being yahoos in here.
Yeah.
What's your greatest memory of me?
My greatest memory of you. Wow. Okay. One of my favorite stories that Lee tells about us is that one of the first times we played Ultimate Frisbee together, and how he
These are facts.
they thought that it was a slight that he had been stuck with me. My favorite story you tell is the story about throwing up in a Humvee.
Oh yes, that's a good one.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And then
that is by the way, that is one of my 4 stories that I tell. That is what would qualify as my most embarrassing yet proud moment. That's a great, which I know the superlative of most, and I tell you, I've got 4 of them. I think that just kind of gives you an indication of kind of what kind of dude I am more than anything.
Yeah, and the number of stories you have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Rock on. I appreciate you sharing with some levity there with us. All right, so Cole, we are talking about friendship and accountability, and just kind of set the stage for us. We talked in our last episode about being a member of a church and those types of things. To put my cards on the table, I think it's really important to understand what membership at a church looks like, especially for college students, to then move on to this next stage about finding good friends. Just to say it as clearly as we can, I think your best friends should probably be at your church. Not in every case and not without exception, but I think in most cases that's not a bad way to kind of start off this conversation of recognizing there's some quality about folks that are in your church that make for good friends.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think by God's grace, He has designed us to be in community, to influence our community, and also we have to recognize that we are influenced by our community. And so the friends that we intentionally choose to connect with have a big influence on us. And so what we don't do is we don't pull out of the world, and we don't become enemies to the world, but we are really in particular about how we are friends with the people of the world, while still guarding against being friends with the system of the world.
Right.
The Bible uses the world to refer to both of those categories: the people that fill the world, and the system of the world that is contrary to the gospel and the ways of the Lord. Yeah, and so we have to be really careful how we become friends with the people of the world, in such a way that we don't then become friends with the ways of the world. And I just don't think we can underestimate how much we are creatures of our environment. And so, that bad company corrupts good morals and those kinds of things.
Is that in the Bible somewhere?
Probably. And so it
is. To be clear, it is.
Yeah. And so, we have to think well about what friendship means, why it's important, and why friendship with those who would point us towards Christ should be really important to us.
So one thing I just want to say, we're both the father of young children. You've got 4 of them that are what ages?
They're odd this year, so they are 9, 7, 5, and 3.
So ours are 7, 5, and 4. As of a week from now, we'll have 4 instead of the 3. So we're all right there in the same group. And if your kids are anything like mine, going to school and everything, one of the real anxieties that my oldest daughter shared was what if no one likes me? What if I don't make any friends? Does that ever go away?
I think the fear of man, that's what the Bible would call that, is a temptation that we will experience the rest of our lives. Some of us experience it to greater degrees. I think some of us experience it in different ways. And so how do we fear man? Well, I think one of those is, do people like me? Do they want to be around me? I think that is a genuine fear. And so we can recognize it, but then we also need to recognize that elevated above that is our fear of the Lord. And our trust in him and the community that he calls us to and the ways he promises to provide for us, that we're not driven by our fear of man or our what we feel like is emptiness or loneliness, those kind of things.
But what you have clearly articulated there is that desire to have friends that are intimate, that are beneficial and edifying and spur you on to other works and good deeds, that's lifelong.
Yeah.
If that's true, then we probably need to think about that well. So
yes,
that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about this in about 5 main stages, but we're going to ask some really basic questions, and we're going to talk about basic things at length, not because we think people just haven't thought through it, but more importantly, because we think people haven't thought through it well. It's kind of the way I'm thinking about this. So here's the first question I want to throw your way, let you respond to it. How do you make good friendships? Specifically talking with college students that, we work at a BCM and we deal with college students. Like, how do we form healthy friendships as a college student? What would you say to that?
Well, I think even in the way you worded it is really helpful. It's how do we form good friendships? How do we form healthy friendships? So I think about it kind of like in a funnel. The top of that being that you've got to push yourself out there to make friendships. And so if you don't have friendships widely, then you're not going to have good friendships. And so I think, how do you have friendships first? Well, you got to put yourself out there. Extrovert or introvert, whatever, new to this, lots of friends, feeling more lonely, whatever it is, you got to put yourself out there. You got to engage with others. You have to grow as a social person. And so for some people that comes more naturally. For some people that's more of a learned skill. Either way, you got to put yourself out there, make those friends. And then second, I think we're looking for, how do we make good friends? And so I think that good friendship should start with the quality, the character of the person that you're a friend with. So are they a good person?
Or are they a jerk?
Yeah, right. And so can they be a good friend if they're not a good person? Well, yeah, I think you can have really deep friendships that you would classify as, oh man, he's a really good friend. We know each other really well. We're really tight. But I don't know that that's good in the beneficial sense.
The healthy, edifying, building up sense.
Yeah, so if you want good friendships, then you got to be making friends and then identifying the people within that friend group, kind of narrowing the funnel, who are quality people. Okay. And then you've got to be narrowing down and how you intentionally engage on a deeper, healthier level, more consistent level over the long term.
Gotcha. So I think the next natural question I'm going to have to ask is, okay, well then how do I discern those things? What are the qualities I'm looking for? Because we run college ministries and we're both involved in our church. Like, clearly I think there are certain answers that we would give from a biblical perspective that are going to be clearly different from what the world would say about what reciprocity means within a friendship. To the world is entirely different than what it would mean for someone who's a believer in Jesus. So I think that might be worth exploring here in just a moment. And we're going to have to talk about, you said we have to have a wide funnel, and for some people that's a learned skill. Some people that's something that kind of innately happens. Let's put some terms to what those are typically called. People that do that innately are typically your extroverts. Okay. Right. Yeah. And those who have to learn that skill are your introverts. The way we conceive of introverts and extroverts is in many ways wrong, just in general. Yeah. So talk about that. Like, if I'm an introvert and people perceive me one way or I perceive myself one way, that doesn't necessarily mean that's like actually how indicative it is of me making good, healthy friendships. Just to kind of explain what that correlation between introvertedness and extrovertedness means in making friends, because it's not an automatic disqualifier or something that gives you a bump up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I think our culture would default to extroverts being because they're more public, because they're more prominent, because of whatever else, being the ideal, and then therefore introverts are just broken extroverts. And so
there's something wrong with an introvert, not something wrong with an extrovert.
Yes, and so then we just need to fix the introvert, convert them from from something that's broken into something that's working, and then that will solve all the problems. And I think that is a myth on both how we should understand extroverts and introverts. So I think a better way.
And to be clear on that, me and Cole are both extroverts.
Yes.
And so I think
in different ways,
yeah,
but
very different.
absolutely sure.
But at the same time, I think we would both say is like whether we've ever like explicitly said that, we've worked from that mindset.
Yeah,
Like, and frankly, even from ministry, I know I've probably done that.
Yeah, and we are both also married to
introverts.
And so learning to live with our wives in an understanding way, as Scripture would call us to, has required us to learn better.
And learn how bad I was at doing that before. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rock on. So there's this categorically dissimilar way of thinking about this is what they actually are and then what reality tells us about how they function. So I did kind of cut you off there. But introverts doesn't mean that they can't have wide group of friends. It just means they have to do it differently.
Yeah. And I think even thinking about introverts and extroverts as more based on like what energizes you and what wears you down. And so I think for extroverts, you gain energy from being around people and engaging in different ways with maybe even a wide variety of people. And so that can seem like creating this wide group of friends, but it also might be a mile wide and an inch deep. But it gives you energy. And so I can think of environments where I even get energized thinking about going to that, not even being there, but just knowing that that's coming. That's already starting to energize me,
right?
Because of how I'm wired as an extrovert. And my wife, anticipating that, is already starting to be drained just thinking about having to go into that environment, let alone when she gets into that environment, it's draining. And so that's where on the introvert side, the energy is gained from maybe more personal or introspective time, and it's expended in more social engagements. But it doesn't diminish the value of either one. Mm-hmm. What's really important is that we don't elevate to prominence a very like self-centered perspective that says, well, it's all about what gives me energy. Mm-hmm. And so whatever gives me what I want, then that's what's most important. That's better. Mm-hmm. And so that's why an extrovert would say, well, what gives me energy is all of these people, even though it's not any depth. And what the introvert would say, well, I don't have to have friends. I don't need friends. I don't want friends because that's expending. And so it's better for me just to become a recluse. Mm-hmm. Both of those are wrong understandings of how we're to be friends. And it can inherently be a sinful, self-centered way to.
Right. And so I think that really leads us into the next question of, okay, well then how do we pare down exactly how we go from a broad group of people who are potential good friends that are healthy relationships and paring that down? What qualities are we looking for? Because I think the wrong way would say, oh, if I'm an extrovert, I've got to have a lot of extroverts around me because we just get along and we're going to give each other energy and that's good. And it's always good without exception. Clearly that's not accurate. So what's a better understanding of that? How could we come to a more precise understanding of what is beneficial in the long run for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we're looking for is the things that Scripture would point us to about the benefits of a friend. And so in let's do Proverbs 18:24. It says a man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And so the distinction here is going to be made between companions and friends. So a companion is someone that you're nearby. A friend is someone, there's something very distinct about a friend. They may not even actually be nearby, but what marks them off is that they stick closer than a brother. The connection is not even just physical proximity, it's relational proximity. And I think, so that's one of the things we've got to be looking for. It's not just number, but that relationship that means that even in hard times, they're not running from us.
Not bailing on you.
Not bailing on us. Yeah. And then I think another proverb that's helpful is in Proverbs 27, verse 9. It says, oil and perfume make the heart glad, and the sweetness of a friend comes from his earnest counsel. And what I love about this is I think that if we were to poll students on my campus and say, okay, what is the sweetness of a friend? What defines the sweetness of a friend? I think we would get a lot of, man, we laugh together, we enjoy the same activities, we talk about the same things. There can be all sorts of fun things that are the sweetness of a friend.
And there's this reciprocity with it.
Yes,
we do it together.
We do this together. And I don't think those things are are wrong. I think actually it's part of the process of figuring out who are good friends. It's part of developing that, whatever else. But what Proverbs would say is that the sweetness of a friend comes from his earnest counsel. That he earnestly desires to speak into your life. He knows you well enough to be able to do that. He or she is wise and able and willing to speak into your life. And that may not always be the most like kind and comforting fun thing, right? But it's the necessary and the wise thing. So I think that's what we're looking for in a good friend.
Okay. So when we're evaluating people that we want to have earnest relationships with, I think there's this natural kind of relation that you build with people. Like, you can understand if you have any kind of social intelligence about you, like, this person is compatible with my personality, and they, even if we're entirely different, like, we're compatible in a way that is going to be beneficial mutually to us, not in a reciprocity way, but like it's building up for both of us. I think one mistake that people might make is that if we're college students and we've been in church, we've grown up in church, and we understand like levels of spiritual maturity, we then automatically assume, oh, if they're not as spiritually mature as me, if not a little less, then we can't be friends. Like, I think that's clearly the wrong thing, because we could take Proverbs 27:9 and say, well, they can't give me counsel, and therefore... Well, we've missed the entire notion of iron sharpening iron. Iron sharpening iron doesn't mean that you have two blades that are equally honed, and that's how it works. It just means iron, like similar, and that they are working together for mutual benefit. I think that might be one way that we could get wrong with that. Would you agree? Is there
I think especially when we talk about discipling friendships, where you are helping me grow in my discipleship, in my fellowship or my faithfulness to the Lord. You and I, as peers, we do that. I've got friends who are more faithful, more mature than me, that invest into me, and those that are less mature than I am, they're just as much engaged in the process of growing me in my faith. Absolutely. So I don't think there has to be like equal standing or, like you said, reciprocity. Yeah. I'll give you, you give me, and then if you don't give me the same amount, then we can't be friends.
Yeah, and I think, I say this clearly not in a prideful way, but like that was our relationship whenever I first came to Fayetteville. It was like I was a brand new believer, essentially. You were not. You were on a leadership team that I was actually a member of your team as a freshman. And then that relationship quickly went from you being my team leader to us being on two separate teams, leading teams. So like even there you saw that it progressed, but like there was a clear difference. And if we had operated under the principle that like, well, we can't be friends because we're not at the same level, like literally we wouldn't be sitting here right now. So I think there's just a clear anecdotal evidence right there that like that's not how this is meant to work. Yeah. And I think that's just kind of destructive whenever we start weeding people out of our friend group because, hey, well, they're not going to make the cut. Well, that's a pretty prideful thing to say. You're probably not as mature as you think, if that's what the game we're wanting to play.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so we've kind of identified like what the value of friendship actually is and what it is not in that sense. So I guess the next question that we really want to talk about whenever we consider, friendship here is what kind of time investment is realistically necessary for us to have to invest in order to be able to get to that point where we have those healthy friendships. Is it always the same at every stage of life, at every dissimilar, two friends? Are they always going to be at the same level of health over X amount of time, and that's always the constant? How does that actually work out? What can we realistically expect?
No, I don't think it's constant. Because I think that sometimes there's just a natural affinity, and you meet somebody and you guys just hit it off. And I think praise the Lord for those kinds of friends. And I think you'll have some of those in college. I don't think you should assume every one of your friends will be that kind of friend. And I think later in life there may be just there won't be the kind of friend factory opportunities that college often provides. Not a quarantined 2020 COVID college experience, right. But a lot of what a typical college experience has, and hopefully will return to, creates this like friend factory where you're just constantly around the chance to grow in friendship. Later on in life, that might be harder. You may not be able to make those friends as quickly or as deeply without a lot more intentionality. And so that's going to require more intentional work than necessarily just quantity of work to try to make those friendships.
Yeah, and I think there's a certain deceptiveness to how that affinity that is natural with people that it might be just because you live in a dorm room together, your suite mates, whatever, and you're around each other. That kind of deceives you into thinking that you're far more compatible than you are. Well, part of that's just proximity. Sometimes it's not your roommate, but you do hit it off with somebody, but it turns out to be not a very healthy relationship. Well, just because you jumped in with both feet really deep into a relationship doesn't mean that it's healthy. Right. And I think that's something that is going to take some patience and discernment to kind of understand the difference between those two things. I can't remember who said this originally, but you don't keep holding on to a mistake because you spend a lot of time making it.
Yeah.
Right. Like we shouldn't do that.
Oh, man.
But I mean, like, I think there's a deceptiveness to like how quickly we become friends. It's not always good. Nor is it to say that it's deceptive, or it is deceptive to say that because it took a while that friendship is less valuable than another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's totally true.
All right, so if that's true, again, what we're doing here is we're just asking really basic questions to try to get us to think about this a little more clearly. We've got good friends, good, healthy, beneficial friendships that are edifying mutually for both of us. When is it okay to disagree with a friend, even sharply disagree with them over what situations, what kind of sensibilities might be at play? Talk to us about how good friends can clearly disagree and still remain friends in a healthy way. What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it depends on the nature of the disagreement. So I think Republicans and Democrats should be friends.
You're right.
Absolutely. So I think that's a quick example. Can we disagree and still be friends? Yes. Like I think we can find. I think when we get into some pretty extreme versions of tribalism and silos and however we want to talk through that's really dangerous for us. Mm-hmm. And these echo chambers that we only listen to people who agree with us. Sometimes that can, again, we're going to always come back to, we're guarding against that self-centered desire that's inherent in sin that wants to make everything about me and make everything comfortable for me and grow my kingdom. And so I think we got to fight that. And so a good example is I think you should be friends with people across the aisle from you, in those political regards. I think that helps temper you. It helps you see them as a person. It helps you connect with them. And so, yeah, I think that's valuable. Now, what are some friendships? What are some disagreements I think we have to be really careful with? Well, I think when we're in those spaces, particularly as we want to be friends with people who aren't believers, or we want to be friends with the people of the world and guard against the system of the world, mm-hmm. That's where we just have to be wise. And we have to know that you spend a lot of time with someone who's going to push a system that's different than you, that is going to eventually...
It's going to influence you one way or another.
Yeah. If you spend a lot of time listening to a particular, viewpoint, a particular media platform, a news channel, whatever else, you may agree with 90% of what they have to say, and that 10% is something that you disagree with, but eventually you listen to that enough, it becomes really hard to identify what that 10% is mm-hmm. anymore, because you've just ingested hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of that, Fox News, CNN, whatever your choice of media might be, right? So I think we can do the same thing with friendships. We have to be really careful that we're being friends with the person of the world and not the system of the world. And so that's the second category I think we want to be careful with, where yes, you can disagree. You can disagree on the most fundamental thing, which is that you need Jesus Christ to save you and to be the Lord of your life, and still be their friend. But with the intention knowing that they still need that. You have mm-hmm. to one day agree on that, or you will spend eternity separated from each other. That friendship will end in that way. I think the third one where we have to be careful about disagreement is if you and I, as brothers in Christ, have a disagreement, particularly where I've sinned against you, mm-hmm. and you've come to address that sin in my life. I think as we look, whether that's in Matthew 18 or when we look at James 3, and we understand why are there divisions among you. Well, there might be a point where we have to end that friendship because it can't be repaired.
Right.
And particularly when it comes in that regards, because one of us is sinfully unrepentant.
I think one thing that's really beneficial here for us, I use this analogy whenever I do counseling with students a lot of times with broken friendships, broken relationships, boyfriends, girlfriends, they had a bad blow up, whatever. I think there is a clear calling for those of us who are believers in Jesus to understand the difference between reconciliation and restoration. Okay. Those are two different things, because reconciliation is what we were all called to be reconciled to God and be called to reconcile with
given
one
the
another.
ministry of reconciliation.
You don't have the option to not be reconciled. I must be reconciled to you, even if you have sinned against me, and it's at the point where, like, hey man, we can't continue in our friendship in the same way. We can be reconciled and yet not restored. To be restored would be, to have those differences put aside, or dealt with in such a way that now we go right back to where we were and we have restored the relationship to where it was. That's different than reconciliation. Yeah. And I think what you're kind of hinting at there is, like, we don't ever just like write somebody off, period. Even if there is such a sharp disagreement that we would have to bring in Matthew 18 or James 3 or 1 John and kind of looking at what it is that we're actually doing. Like, we don't have the option to not be reconciled, but we don't have to be restored in that same sense. And I think with Romans 12:8 or 14:8, I'll look it up here in a minute, where Paul says that as far as it depends on you, live at 12. Peace with all men. Like, clearly there is the call for us to live peaceably with one another, but that doesn't mean that, like, I have no role as long as I said my piece, now I'm backing off. Like, no, there's still a responsibility that I share within that. I just think it extends maybe not as far as we think, because I think most students recognize the need for reconciliation, but they confuse reconciliation as being restoration. I think those are two different things.
Yeah, and I think we can get into this maybe in another podcast where we deal more with conflict directly, but I do think that there is an element where we forgive someone and we no longer count their grievance against them, but it doesn't mean that we aren't wiser because of it. And so that doesn't mean that we perfectly forget. It's as if we've forgotten, because we no longer hold that debt against them. We don't hold it against them. Yep, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't change the way we interact with each other.
Right. That reconciliation doesn't override wisdom in that regard. Like, wisdom informs reconciliation, but it doesn't override the wisdom that we have been given by God to utilize. All right, so I think that's beneficial, because we've talked about how to get good friends. Basically, what we just talked about is how to remain good friends. What do we do whenever we move out beyond college? How do you stay connected with those good friends after college, after a big stage in life that's different? If you are in college, then maybe getting married, then maybe moving, then maybe having kids, then moving to another job. Like, there's all sorts of stages that can interrupt that friendship and the closeness that you have there. What advice would you give to college students on how to stay connected with those beneficial relationships that you have formed?
Yeah. I think the reality is that your friendships will change. I think probably more friendships change or fall apart or disappear between your first and second semester of college than in any other point of your life, and between your first and second years of college. And then when you complete college and you're a whole year out from graduation, those can be really distinct marks between graduation day and a year, your first anniversary of graduation, because friendships do change. And so what I don't want anyone to be thinking is like, well, if they have changed, I've done something wrong, because no, they will change. But you also need to know that if you're not active and engaged in it, they'll all change and they'll all fall apart.
And they'll all fall apart in a bad way. Yes. Like, they'll change in a bad way.
Yeah. So I think on one side you've got, how do you maintain friendships from college? Well, I think you have to know that the engagement that's necessary. We'll go back to our biblical categories. One was, not just companionship, but it's sticking closer, right? Not just proximity, but particularly in adversity. So are you engaging with them in the hard things of your life and engaging with them particularly in the hard things of their life, right? Are you weeping with those who weep, and are you rejoicing with them when they rejoice? Again, going back to Romans 12, super helpful here. And then are you seeking them for earnest counsel, and are you still having the kind of conversations that gives you the opportunity to provide them with earnest counsel? I think that might even be, honestly, Lee, for you and I, one of the ways that has really marked how our friendship has maintained over 15 years is that we have continued to seek one another out, not just for companionship, because we really enjoy being together, and everything that's not recorded in this podcast is a lot of fun as well. But there's also been, those late night, very early morning conversations where we're continuing to seek each other's earnest counsel, and receive it from one another. I think that those have been,
Even if it's difficult things
even
to
if
hear.
it's difficult things to hear and to talk about, we've found that. And so I think that's also what marks where I would say, man, was that guy a college friend, or is that guy still a friend? And so I've got college buddies, who I saw some of this when we were in college, but I don't experience it anymore. And then I've got some that I may only talk to once or twice a year or less, but that still marks our connection. Is that I call them for, hey, this big thing's happened in my life, and I want you to know. I want you to pray about it. I want your thoughts on it. I may have to catch you up a ton because we haven't talked a bunch.
But we're willing to do it.
But we're willing to do that because that's the kind of friendship we have.
Yeah, and I think the next question that I would ask to kind of clarify that is, you've already talked about, like, after graduation, things clearly will change. Let's say that as clear as we can. It will change. Anticipate that. That's not bad. It just means that it will. So,
yeah, and I think the same is true with other stage of life things. Like when you
whenever
get married,
yep.
like your friendships change when you get married, both with your married friends and with your single friends. I think when you have kids, your friendships change, both with your friends who have kids and your friends who don't have kids. So it shouldn't be that, oh, well, that's the death knell to that friendship. It's just going to change.
It's just a signpost that
change.
it's going to change. So just to be precise, since we work with college students, anticipating that it will change. First question, how do you get new, good, healthy friends? Is that process different than it was in college now that you're out of college? And then two, what do you do with the ones that you were really close with in college but now aren't? Is that something that we really need to be that we need to lament? Is that something that's lamentable in the sense of, like, we pine after that? Like, how do we handle that after college?
Yeah, so the first question is, how do you make friends after college? And I think the processes are similar, but you have to know that the environment has changed. So the environment of college often does the work for you. You live down the hall together. You experience the adversity of having the same terrible chemistry class or chemistry professor. You go on adventures together. You break up with your boyfriend, and she's the one down the hall that walks through that. With all those, kind of the environment of life creates that for you. Life after college won't do that, particularly if you move to a new town, if you join a new church, if you have a new job. So, but all the things that you still need, you need to intentionally widen the funnel and be social, connect with people. Even if it's a drain on you, you need to do that for your sake and for theirs. You need to then look for people who over time show themselves to be of good character, and then you need to engage in good conversations. And so creating
that conversation
spaces
necessarily will be different because of the stage in life.
Yeah. And so how are you then engaging with people? How are you seeking to be hospitable and have people into your home? How are you seeking to create those kind of spaces after hours, whatever that might be, to have that level of conversation, that earnest counsel kind of conversation?
And I think that really hits on the dichotomy, the false dichotomy, I should say, between introverts and extroverts. Extroverts are going to have to work hard to actually focus their energy to develop healthy relationships. Introverts are going to have to focus their efforts on widening the funnel. Neither one of those are better than the other. There's practical benefits at different points. Yep. So I think that's just really useful to throw out there. So here's the last question I want to just kind of wrap up with relationships in general and friendships, specifically within college, because it'll be a little bit different in every stage of life. How intimate of friendships should we have between the opposite sex? How close of a friend should a guy and a girl be that's not dating, they're not, doing anything other than just being platonic friends? How would you quantify that? Can you quantify that? What kind of markers would we say, hey, maybe that's not a great idea if I see this happening? What would you say about how intimate those friendships should be between the opposite sexes?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to put them into two buckets. First, I'm going to talk about where both participants are single, and then where one or both of them are married. So I think in the category of, so in general, I would say, can platonic friendships exist? Yes, absolutely. And can they have great significance into your life, great value? Can they spur you on? Absolutely. And I can think of lots of women I'm so grateful that I have great and wise and helpful friendships that they've invested in my life over the long term, and even newer friendships that have developed. So can they exist? Yes. Okay. what are the struggles when both of them are single? Well, I think in our culture we equate romantic relationships, sexual relationships. Those are just attractional things. Intellectual. What's it like to bandy wits and those kind of things, right? We enjoy the counsel. There's all kinds of parts to this, right? Our culture conflates all of those
into one thing.
And so that can be confusing for yourself. Like you're receiving this friendship and you're thinking, oh, well, maybe this is something more.
And that's where like even the hilarity of the language we use, like, oh, you like her? Yeah, but do you like her?
Yeah.
Like one that just demonstrates how dumb we categorize these things already. But yeah, that we roll it all into one. And we use the same word to describe them both. You like and you like. You really like.
Yeah. So I think we can confuse ourselves. We can get mixed signals. We can absolutely send mixed signals. And so I think we have to be really wise about that. I think the same can be true when one or both of them are married to other people. And so we have to just be, we have to know that category of platonic, wise, faithful friendship can exist. We also have to know that there are tons of cultural, environmental forces and internal sinful forces that might cause us to conflate or equate. There's a magnetic pull that might pull this friendship over to this attractional friendship, which might pull it into a sexual desire. All those things might be there. So I think we can agree that it can exist, and then also wisely know
where the dangers are.
Yeah.
And so I think that I think I would even go so far as to say, I think as college students, especially if they are mature believers in Jesus, like I think there is great benefit to having what we might even call intimate relationships with opposite sex. But you've got to know the dangers going into that. I mean, like the joke, now culturally is like you don't want to catch feels. Okay, I don't want to just like reduce it down to that trite of a saying, but like you do have to have wisdom in recognizing when things are becoming too intimate. You shouldn't be having 2 a.m. conversations alone with the opposite sex, probably anytime, unless it's your wife or your husband. Like, I think that's just unwise. So I think that there are some clear ditches there that I think we kind of innately even know, especially if you have any kind of maturity, that kind of marks out what is proper and what is not proper. What else would you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think there's a great book by C.S. Lewis on the 4 loves. And I think that's the title of the book. And he breaks down just these different ways that God has blessed us with different ways in which we love others. And one of the chapters in there is on friendship. And he tackles this problem of how our culture wants to equate the two of friendship and love. And so I think we do this in a problem our culture has in how we understand relationships between the two sexes, and then also how we understand relationships just within one gender. And so our culture can't understand how men can be friends and have deep friendships, and not at some point begin to bring in like, well, is there something else going on?
Right.
Like, is there something sexual going on? We even see this in like, you can't read a modern biography of a former figure, like Abraham Lincoln, and not have some chapter which has to tackle, whether the author agrees or not, on whether or not Abraham Lincoln had a sexual relationship with his law partner, because they traveled around and shared the same bed and were really tight. And we see Alexander Hamilton. There's a bunch of guys like this.
Jonathan and David in Scripture.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And so C.S. Lewis tackles that, and he has this great quote, and I'll read it. It says, "Those who cannot conceive friendship as substantive love, but only as a disguise or elaboration of eros," so that sexual love,
erotic,
betray the fact that they have never had a friend. I'm like, woo, all right.
So
Clive Stables, come on, Jack.
To put that in English, to say like, if you can't conceive of there actually being deep friendships, it's because you don't have any friends.
You don't know what deep friendships look like. And so you've always connected, and that may be because of abuse in your life, it may be because of mistakes in your life, maybe because of immaturity. There could be all kinds of reasons in there, but let us tell you that absolutely there can exist these things, and we should guard them. And I think it's really important, because I think, for instance, I think singleness is a gift to the church.
Yeah.
that God has given to the church. And so whether that's something that is a short-term stage for someone's life or a long-term status for someone's life, that is a God-given gift to our church. We should cherish it. We should guard it. We should elevate it. When we don't have a category for you can be a part of our family, you can be my friend, but only because I'm friends with your husband or I'm friends with your wife, or we can't really be friends anymore because you're single and my status has changed, or I'm single and you're married and we can't be friends. Like that destroys so many of the bonds that are necessary within the different marital statuses within a church.
It's like innately detrimental
Yes.
at its core, because what we're taking out, or what we're bringing in is just categorically, that's what defines friendships as opposed to these other qualities that we've already talked about.
Yeah.
All right, last thought. Anything else you want to throw out there
that's
that
good.
we haven't covered? All right, so I started off kind of impromptu asking you, what was your favorite memory of me? I want to be just really clear and say that I didn't prepare him for that, and I was just rushing him. I want to share what I think was one of my favorite memories with you, and it was actually the last time that me, you, A-Train, and David Haley, D-Hay, were together. We were at a buddy's wedding, and at our buddy's wedding, there was a humorous situation involving one of the sisters of the bride, and it wasn't like anything like mean-spirited or anything like that, but it was clearly that me and Cole were making the exact same joke at the same time without saying a word, and David Haley knew it. And he was holding it together where me and Cole were not. And so we're just over there laughing quietly, that then turned into like that weird breathing.
Yeah, when you're trying to control the laugh, but you can't, and that's what makes it worse.
And then it just erupts into actual laughter. And D-Hay's over there, well, let me tell you why they're laughing. And here's why they're laughing. And he was explaining it. And at different points, like me or Cole would point over to him because, like, yeah, that's exactly what we were thinking. And he's like, you've got to excuse them. They're dumb. This is what they're thinking. I'm sorry. I apologize to them. But here's the thing. David would have laughed too if he'd have beat us to it. One of us may have had to been the one to be David's role, but we just beat him to the laughing.
Yeah, we have found over the years that there are two spaces we can't sit when we're in the same room, whether that was when we took classes together in seminary or whether we've sat in very important, serious meetings with all of our peers, other campus ministers. We cannot sit directly next to each other. So that, like this, because this allows way too much opportunity for us to lean over and say things that just cause one or both of us to erupt in laughter. Or we can't actually even just sit where we have direct eye contact with one another. We have to sit in the circle in such a way that it would require us to like turn our heads and both make the effort. And at least there's a chance that in that moment when we want to make eye contact and laugh about something, one of us might have the self-control in that environment to not look.
It's normally not me, just to be clear.
And so, apparently then it's my job to just stay steadfast and not look at Lee, because if I look at Lee, we'll both bust up.
Yeah, and normally at the most inappropriate of times.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right. Well, I mentioned in the last episode that I normally have a customary question we end with the podcast on, but you've broken that system. So since we're hearing from you 3 times in a row, I'm mixing up the questions. I'm going to mix it up right now. What is the most embarrassing thing that you did in college that you can tell us that won't get you fired right now? And if it involves me, all the better. If not, whatever.
Yeah. One of my favorite embarrassing stories to tell that involves Lee and I, is us hanging out, and you're gonna know the story right away. It's us hanging out in 508. We're watching something in the house that Lee lived in.
You do know this is going to be This is going to be broadcast.
Had set up couches all the way around the living room on three sides, and Lee's over there and I'm over here, and we're laying down and we're watching a show, whatever else. We've been binging it for a while.
Scrubs. We were watching Scrubs.
We're super comfortable with one another, and at some point as a college dude, I make the choice to break wind. And I don't just do it
boisterously.
Yeah. And even like I think I lifted my leg, like it was like I wanted to make sure that Lee across the room knew. And then Lee just says, "Did you forget Casey was here?" And without I just yep.
Casey,
and that was it.
Casey being my girlfriend at the time, now wife. She didn't say anything. I think she just kind of
just cowered into herself.
That gif of Homer Simpson walking backwards into the bushes. That's what she was doing with the couch.
And we didn't bring anything else up. We just yep.
Nothing else needed to be said.
That was it.
Much like this podcast,
Nothing else needs to be said.
nothing else needs to be said. Thank you for spending some time with us. If you got any questions, we'll be able to answer any questions if you want to drop them in the comments or whatever. Yeah, rock on. So we're going to end episode, what are we on, 26 right now? We're going to end that with our typical benediction of sorts, and that's with the phrase, do good and don't sin.